Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to look at Humanoid Azir up against Jensen Leblanc, a matchup that you guys have requested a few times now, and it was a pretty interesting game. Humanoid did manage to build up a pretty significant lead in the early game, so we're going to take a look at how he did that. First though, I want to quickly talk about how this matchup works. So as you guys probably know by now, Azir is a very strong lane bully in the 1v1, and LeBlanc is not particularly strong in lane. She's a decent laner. Like if she's against most melee champions, or she's against a champion that's average in laning, she can win. But the problem is, compared to like the really strong lane bullies, we're talking Azirs and Victors and stuff like that, she tends to lose the 1v1. She has very long cooldowns. But the thing is, a lot of LeBlanc's strength in the early game comes from gank pressure. You've got extremely strong gank setup. You can cover a really long distance and set up ganks. And also there's like, even if your jungler isn't there, there's a little bit of implied pressure, a lot of the time, if you're playing against a lane bully, they will respect just a little bit more because you have that gank threat, right? Even if your jungler isn't actually there, there's the possibility of them being there. So straight away, this is a problem that we're going to have here, is LeBlanc Sejuani is not a particularly good combo. So when you're playing LeBlanc, especially against really strong lane bullies, you really want something that can help you make plays happen in the early game. So we're talking stuff like Viego, Lee Sin, Jarvan, these sorts of champions that can make stuff happen. And it's also pretty nice if you can have an AD jungler as opposed to an AP jungler, because Merc treads are very good against LeBlanc. They give you magic resist, they give you movement speed to help dodge the chain, or just like walk further away from LeBlanc. And obviously they give a little bit of magic resist as well, right? And Sejuani, while not strictly an AP champion, is a champion that Merc treads gets a lot of value from, or against, right? Like she does magic damage, she also has a lot of CC. So Merc treads rush against Sejuani LeBlanc is like a very good option. And I also don't think that Sejuani has the same pressure that a ganking jungle like Xin Zhao, Jarvan, etc. has. So that's going to allow Azir to play this matchup quite a lot more aggressively than he would normally be able to against a LeBlanc. So we'll come back to that kind of this draft at the end, because I kind of want to talk about it a bit more, but for now, let's focus on the gameplay. So Level 1. The things we're always thinking about in our mid matchups, guys, or at least what I think is most important, is cooldowns and wave states. So you always want to be thinking about, how long are the enemy's cooldowns, and if they're up or down, can I punish them and stuff like that. And you also, if you can, you want to be using your wave to kind of almost like you want to, your wave is kind of like an expression of what you want to do. So like if you're pushing the wave, that means you're trying to get priority, you're trying to like harass your opponent under tower, you're trying to build an advantage. If you're freezing the wave, maybe you're playing safer from ganks, maybe you're trying to deny your opponent of creeps and stuff like that. Basically what you do with the wave, you don't really want to keep doing the same thing with the wave the whole time. It's really flexible, and you can adapt it in the moment. That's why I think it's really important to know what different wave states do for you. And if you haven't checked out my wave control guide, I really would recommend checking that out, because I think that gives you a good idea of what different waves are used for, and that way you can kind of use them dynamically. So starting out, we have Azir. It has a very short cooldown on his W compared to LeBlanc, 18 seconds on W at level 1. In this matchup as Azir, you can kind of just freeze the wave on your side from the get-go, because it's very difficult for LeBlanc to actually crash waves early. And on top of that, she kind of struggles to trade on you if you're like up here, because if she QWs, she's just going to take a tower shot. If she chains, she can't really stay in chain range. On top of that, if we're remembering that as LeBlanc's main threat in the early game comes from gank setup, it's simply put, like much harder to gank an opponent this way back here as opposed to up here. And I guess maybe another thing on top of that is we don't really need to push this wave or the first 3 waves in, because we already have advantage over LeBlanc. She has an 18-second cooldown at level 1 that we can look to just harass her whenever she goes for creeps and stuff like that, compared to Azir's much shorter cooldown. So you can see that, like, because of all these things, because we know that we win level 1 anyway, because we don't want to get ganked, because LeBlanc's trading is quite difficult up in the enemy lane, you can just keep the wave here. And there's also not that many reasons to push here. If you push 3 waves on Azir, it's good. Like, you can harass your opponent under tower, like, don't get me wrong, it's useful to get wards in the enemy jungle and stuff like that, but it's not a situation where Maokai's looking for invades or Sejuani's looking for invades, so the priority mid isn't as important as it would be if, say, this were like a Graves versus Lilia matchup where there's going to be a lot of invades, or a Nidalee or something like that. And also Azir's not going to do that much with his prio early, so it's kind of just like, yeah, there's not really any reason to push. Azir's also gone for a mega scaling, a mega early game rune page here, so we can see Scorch, Airy, and Cheap Shot, which is basically the strongest early game page that you can possibly get. He clearly knows that he can really heavily bully this 1v1. And here LeBlanc goes in, uses her cooldown, so she is going to take quite a bit of damage on the way out. You will also see that both players here started with Corrupting Pot, which is, I would say it's good. Basically, the reason you normally start with Corrupting Pot is because it gives you a lot of sustain, right? So it's good against poke. And a lot of people think of LeBlanc as an all-in champion, and actually a lot of the time she will be. If you're playing against a LeBlanc and she's got like Ignite or something, and she can like really heavily trade on you early, then she is maybe going to be able to burst you down. But most of the time, especially if you're versing TP LeBlanc and you have a TP of your own, you're probably going to want Corrupting Pot instead, because without Ignite, she kind of lacks the burst, and also because you have TP, you get extra value out of Corrupting Pot. So just by having Corrupting Pot, you'll be able to pretty much always stay out of lethal range anyway, and keep harassing. So let's go back a little bit here, because we've actually reversed the wave state, so I just want to talk about that. Right now, wave is in, you know, pretty fine position. We're just like staying on our side of the lane. It would be very difficult to get ganked here. Do a little bit of harass back on LeBlanc. So here we can start to get a little bit more aggressive. LeBlanc's getting kind of low, and also Maokai is entering the river. So that means that we're going to be, like, one, they probably don't want to gank because LeBlanc is getting lower, but also if they do, we have Maokai nearby. So once again, thinking about the cooldowns and thinking about the wave state, here, because we're playing around what our jungler wants and what we want, also we saw Sejuani top, just up here somewhere. So we know basically that because our jungler's here, because LeBlanc is low, and because their jungler's top, that we're fine to just push this wave in and continue to harass under tower. So did get hit by the E, but just traded E back. LeBlanc's going to be on cooldown for a long time. As long as you hug to bot side here, there should be no threat of an enemy gank. We can maybe get flashed on, but it's pretty unlikely, especially with Maokai nearby. So this wave is going to go all the way in. I'll just speed it up a little. Maokai waiting in the wings as well. So this is kind of a big problem for LeBlanc, is that Azir is actually the one receiving help rather than her. You would normally expect it to be the other way around, because Azir doesn't really have gank setup of his own, and LeBlanc does. And so the fact that Maokai has been able to come here and like actually kind of force LeBlanc off some waves, it's partly a result of Humanoid obviously like laning well, but also it's just, it feels really weird to not be able to support this LeBlanc at all. And this is a really rough situation for LeBlanc to be in, because you're kind of forced to use your cooldowns to CS. You can see how she's using Q and E, but the problem is, when you do that, you now have no threat on Azir, which means Azir can CS for free, and it's super easy for him to harass you. So very difficult situation for Jensen to play out, and Humanoid can just like keep him in lane here. If you look at the vision around mid, there is zero chance of getting ganked. There is so much vision around mid, it's ridiculous. So he can play it as far up in the lane as he wants and just pin LeBlanc to tower. And she's never really going to get the opportunity to do anything. You could see that she's kind of just forced to stay back here and take it, which is definitely not what LeBlanc wants. So gonna go back here for a base. Could maybe stay longer, but the problem is here, it's like you don't really have enough mana to full push in another wave. And what you don't want is to half push the wave and then have LeBlanc TP back and the wave end up frozen with you having to TP back. So it's better in this case just to match bases. If LeBlanc tried to push this in, she also doesn't have enough mana. You can base TP and freeze the wave. So instead we'll just both match base here and TP back to lane. As you can see, looking towards the Merc Treads here, picks up a Doran's Ring, which is kind of interesting. I think if this is solo queue, you pick up a Dark Seal, but naturally there are like less kills in competitive, so Doran's Ring can be an option. But if this was solo queue, I personally would have picked up the Dark Seal. I think it's better. But building towards these Merc Treads, really, really important. So still have a lot of vision around mid. Maokai's going to enter the river here, so we probably could push if we wanted to, but it's maybe better to harass LeBlanc a bit lower first. You know, make sure she loses a bit more HP, make it just like a bit harder for Sejuani to actually come here and gank before we decide to get really aggressive. This is really good play from Jensen, managed to like weave in, hit the chain, and also punish the fact that Azir just used his Q, so that was really nice. But here, now that LeBlanc's on cooldown for a while, can just go back to pushing the wave. Maokai playing pretty aggressively on the Raptors here, do have bot priority as well, so is ultimately going to get help from Azir here. Has first move from mid. Hold on to the Sejuani. Sejuani is forced to flash. And LeBlanc almost manages to kill Maokai here, but he manages to live on a little bit of health, and also she loses a lot of HP and her flash. So this is where the lane is kind of over, to be honest. If we go back just a little bit, like just a tiny bit here, if we pause at this moment, LeBlanc's actually in a decent spot. She's still got a corrupting pot, she's full HP. Azir is actually out of corrupting pots, and he's got one ticking, but he's like a little lower on HP. LeBlanc can probably recover from this situation. I think while it sucks to be down in CS, like you're kind of expecting that as LeBlanc, you can definitely recover from here. But the problem is your Sejuani has used Flash, so it's a lot harder to gank mid now. And also, LeBlanc here loses her entire health bar and her Flash. So now just mid ganks are pretty much impossible. Even though Azir burned Flash, he still has a lot of mobility, right? It's pretty difficult. And it's just like really hard for LeBlanc. She kind of has to base here, but also like she really wants to stay. She probably needs to cut her losses and just base. Because, yeah, there's not really anything she can do. She's just going to end up losing a lot of CS. Humanoid can kind of just, like, pushes in. Looks to reset. Not much to it. Going to grab the Merc Treads here. So now Azir is, like, basically unkillable. Again, both of these members, LeBlanc and Sejuani, do not have Flash. Azir has a significant item lead, and Merc Treads is so good against LeBlanc anyway, so it's going to be really hard. So now you can look to be extremely aggressive on Azir, knowing that there's pretty much nothing LeBlanc can do back to you. Manages to dodge the chain. Having the extra movement speed is really nice for that. They keep pushing. Could freeze the wave here if you wanted to. I honestly think you could push here as well, especially if you want to contest the Herald. But you can also freeze the wave. One thing that's really useful against LeBlanc is to try make sure the wave isn't in either extreme. So like you probably don't want to hard freeze it on your side because she can easily like roam around the map, right? You also don't want to hard push to her side that much because again, like she has a gank set up on you. But if you can keep it like relatively in the middle or slightly on your side, it's very difficult for her because she can't really chase you down. But it's also like far enough up that she's going to be forced into using cooldowns to just CS like this. And then when these cooldowns are used to CS, it's really easy to just punish them. So LeBlanc going to be on cooldown here for a while, which means Azir stands next to the creep. This is really important. When you burn someone's cooldowns, the way you punish them is with your positioning. If you stand next to a creep like this, they either A, use a cooldown and CS the creep, or they don't use a cooldown, lose the creep, or they might try and trade on you, but especially once you've got an item lead, you can just trade back with them. So LeBlanc is forced into giving up the CS here, and is probably going to be using a cooldown again. So yeah, every cooldown is just being used on the wave. Now, she did get a pretty nice chain onto the Azir here, but, you know, he can just WE out. So just without having kind of the distance to chase down, it's really difficult. Because, like, let's say this happens in the middle of the lane. If LeBlanc hits one chain, she could follow up with a second, right? Like, if there were no creeps in the way here, if he didn't manage to get all the way away, she could probably RQ and take a pretty good trade. But the problem is, Azir's under his tower, right? So there's no way you're going to get that RQ off. So yeah, there's just not really much she can do at this point. You probably need some jungle assistance, but again, it's like pretty much ungankable. Not really seeing anything you can do at this point. Just really smart wave control out of Humanoid, honestly. Like, there's nothing really special here, but it's just like the wave is consistently in a state that kind of like reflects what he wants at the time. Like if LeBlanc is low, he's being greedy, he can push it in, harass a bit more. If LeBlanc's high in HP, he just like keeps it in a position where it's difficult for her to trade on him, and also quite difficult for her to actually like use the prior for anything. So LeBlanc gets pretty low here. Azir can probably just match base. Now here's something that's like kind of interesting. So if you want, you can push this wave, but I probably wouldn't. So let's just go to it. I'll kind of explain it. So one thing you need to consider is if you match base with someone, you will be back on the map at the same time. If you push an extra wave, you will deny them a wave, and you will base with more gold than them, which is good, but you also will give them a free turn of priority. So let's say that Azir, let's see, if we just view the map, like right now LeBlanc's in base, so Azir probably does have time to shove in this wave, but the problem is, if Azir shoves this wave and then bases, LeBlanc gets to come here and get a free turn to do whatever she wants while Azir's in base. Azir doesn't really need to do that. It's like, he doesn't need to greed for any particular item here. Like, staying one extra wave isn't the difference between getting, like, Lost Chapter or not. And, like, he can just pen LeBlanc in lane anyway. He doesn't really need to give her a free a free wave of priority. So he just bases, looks to match the base, comes here and gets blue, and the result is that LeBlanc doesn't get to leave at all, and he's still got the item he wanted. So he can just go back to playing the lane like normal. LeBlanc is forced into using cooldowns for CS. And this is kind of when the lane is starting to get like really out of control, because at this point, even though LeBlanc's cooldowns are getting shorter, it's just really difficult for her to actually trade into Azir. Like if you look at the CS difference, and also the fact that Azir has blue and can just like shove in these waves if he wants. It's just like really, there's not really any options for LeBlanc here. It's like if the wave stays here, she gets poked. The wave comes under tower, Azir just pushes and farms faster than her. And she's kind of just forced into using cooldowns on creeps over and over, while Azir just looks for the WQ on every creep. You can see preps the W before. Every creep that LeBlanc is walking up for now, she is taking a WQ for. You can see the positioning. He knows that this is the CS that she wants to go for. Has the WQ. Once again, okay, what's the next CS she wants to go for? This one here. Waits for it. WQ. So just, it's honestly just really strong fundamentals. It's just pretty much wave control, punishing cooldowns, and maybe a little bit of like harass timing. Like he is quite good at timing the harass at the right times. You know, making sure it's like when she's going for a creep, or when she's otherwise like kind of locked into an animation or something. So at 10 minutes, it's like real rough for LeBlanc. She's down 30 CS, and this was like their counterpick opportunity. You know, even though I don't think LeBlanc is necessarily a counter to Azir, Azir picked first, so we did have a counterpick here. And I'm probably not going to talk too much more about the lane, because I feel like it's pretty over by this point. I am going to do a full video on like the world's meta, but I just want to quickly talk about why it's sort of just difficult to pick into Azir in general, because Azir is like really, he's just a god champ, right? Like he's really strong 1v1, scales well, has range, hard to gank, good in most team comps. It's very difficult to pick versus Azir, and a lot of the champions that beat Azir 1v1, or at least can go even against Azir in 1v1, are very gankable. You know, if you pick something like Victor, you can be very easily ganked, so people are going towards stuff like Sylas, Akali, or what's the other one? I guess LeBlanc is another one, right? But yeah, the problem is here, I really just don't think LeBlanc Sejuani is a combo that really works. Sylas was banned, so we couldn't go for that. I actually can't remember if Akali was banned or not. But yeah, so I think kind of, let me go to the YouTube outro. Where is it over here? I think to kind of TLDR the game, it was mainly just really solid wave control, a good understanding as well of like the jungle matchup and knowing like what LeBlanc's goals are in the lane, and that was like really reflected in the wave control, right? Like he always kept the wave close to his side. He made it difficult for LeBlanc to trade on her. Whenever LeBlanc did use her cooldowns, he knows that the cooldowns are longer than his, so it's really effective to punish. On top of that, he had great positioning. He positioned really close to the creeps, you know, made her choose between, say, using a cooldown for the creep, giving up the creep, or just like taking damage for her, as you saw when she would take those WQs for walking up to the CS. So I think that is going to be it for this video. Hopefully you guys did learn something from it. If you did, go ahead and like and subscribe, and leave something nice in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.